Okay, I think we'll make a start. Thank you very much, everyone, for coming this evening. My name's Elsie, and this is the Oxbridge Teachers and Advisors Q&A webinar for medical sciences. I am very, very glad to be joined by our fantastic Director of Studies, Professor Hugh Matthews, the Preclinical Medical Sciences DOS here at St John's College. Hugh, I will hand straight over to you to get started. Thank you.
Okay, well, welcome everybody. With no more ado, I'll start sharing my screen and, among other things, explain the role of what a Director of Studies within a subject at Cambridge is involved in, both in terms of what it would mean for undergraduates once they're here, but also relating to the admissions process. And then we can subsequently discuss. I'm sure you'll have lots of questions. So with no more ado, let me share my screen and look at not only the situation for medical sciences at St John's in particular, but by extension, the University of Cambridge in general, but I've also included some information about the vet course in Cambridge as well for completeness. So what would medical and vet sciences at St John's involve? And perhaps, blowing the college's horn a little bit, what makes St John's distinctive and special within Cambridge? Well, we're a relatively large medical college, not the largest, but one of the larger. We normally admit some 17 medics and 4 vets each year. And we're in a position within the fellowship, as is true of most undergraduate colleges in Cambridge, to offer extensive mentoring in all of the relevant subjects during both the preclinical and clinical years. And a lot of this support is coming from the college fellowship itself. St John's, being a large college, has strength in depth across all the individual subjects that make up the medical sciences. I myself am an academic physiologist and neuroscientist, but we have all the various specialist disciplines within the medical sciences represented within this college. And in addition to what we do in supporting students in their academic subjects, and I'll be describing how that dovetails together with what the university does in just a moment, we're well placed to provide support in study skills to augment the academic subjects themselves. And that's typically true of most colleges now. We're very aware that making the transition from a school environment to a university environment is quite a demanding step for a candidate, even if we've succeeded in selecting, as we hope we will, the very strongest candidates academically with the most potential. It's nonetheless a difficult transition to make, and we recognize that and provide support to make sure that it goes as well as it possibly can and that the student's full potential is realized. Being a big undergraduate medical college, we have a vibrant undergraduate community. And indeed, by giving this webinar, I'm skipping an important event in this vibrant sequence. This is the evening of the college's Medical Clinical Lecture, which is co-organized by the Undergraduate Medical Society, overseen by the Fellowship of the College. And this is a medical lecture series. It's the oldest established medical lecture series certainly in Oxford and Cambridge and probably the UK. It's been running for centuries. But a very vibrant undergraduate medical society who play a full role both in academic biomedical events run by the college and also a lot of other more social things that they largely keep to themselves. And in common with many but undergraduate colleges in Cambridge, we try to provide support for summer research placements, book funds, clinical elective support to make sure that we're producing vibrant, rounded, and complete future medical scientists who aren't just the sum of what they've received in the course, but have done interesting things in other places in both their preclinical and their clinical years, so that they're going to be not just members of the medical profession, but potential future leaders in the medical profession, whichever area they end up in. So, what do directors of studies do? I am the preclinical director of studies, covering the first 3 years of the course, and my clinical colleagues both consultants within the Addenbrooke's Hospital here in Cambridge cover the student's progression during the clinical years. And my colleague David Williams is a card-carrying vet, actually a vet ophthalmologist. He looks after the vets in their more veterinary pursuits all the way through, but I'm overseeing their academic performance. What does a director of studies actually do? Well, that's probably the key element of it, overseeing and directing the academic progression of individual students. If things are going well, to encourage; if things are going less well than the student's potential would imply, trying to identify, support, and resolve the problem so that they can achieve that full potential. And also, in pursuit of that, the organisation and oversight of the small group teaching, the supervision teaching that takes place within the colleges. More on that soon. And overall, as I've implied so far, academic support and encouragement to make sure that every undergraduate achieves at their very best. So how does a Cambridge course work, in particular the Cambridge medical and vet courses? How does teaching divide between the college and the university? Well, large group teaching is organised by the university in the form of lectures in each individual subject, practical classes, and ultimately these elements of the course will be assessed summatively in annual tripos or honours examinations centrally organised by the university, into which is embedded in the first 2 years a number of second MB exams, which are essentially the professional qualifying exams in the second MB and the second vet MB that are required to progress towards clinical practice after the clinical part of the course. Now, the flip side of the coin, the college side of the coin, is the organisation of small group teaching and the support of students in a more pastoral sense. And most people within the system wear hats in both of these arenas. In large group sense, I'm a faculty member of the Department of Physiology, Development and Neuroscience, the largest of the preclinical biomedical departments. I'm Professor of Sensory Physiology, and I lecture to second-year medical students on cellular neuroscience, on vision, on olfactory and taste transduction, on various essentially neuroscientific topics. In a college, I'm performing my Director of Studies role and also both organising supervisions, small group teaching in groups of 2 or 3 in other subjects, and actually myself delivering systems physiology supervision teaching to our first-year medical students. Indeed, just prior to this session, I've spent the preceding couple of hours teaching the basic first steps in renal physiology to our first-year students, a couple of groups of students there. And in parallel with the subject-related teaching, both through that teaching and in separate study skills support, we're making sure that undergraduates have full access to the core skills they need to progress. And we're assessing how well they're doing in formative progress tests, typically run within the colleges at present, but there's an increasing tendency for the university in larger groups to run progressive formative tests, often associated with practical classes. That's very true of the medical course with the anatomy classes. A lot of that is tested in a formative rather than a summative sense as the course is going on. And it's quite likely in the next year or two, when candidates who are currently at your schools would present to the course as applicants, that the extent of formative testing by the central university will have expanded still further. So how does the Cambridge course work? What's meant by Parts 1A and Part 1B and Part 2 within the course? Well, the medical sciences tripos and veterinary sciences tripos, tripos meaning a course in 3 parts, are the preclinical courses taken by students wishing to become doctors and vets. And they're covering the broad biological sciences underpinning medicine. But let's think about how they would be approaching these sciences. In the first 2 years, parts 1A and 1B of the 3-year preclinical course, the students are covering the core biomedical sciences required by all would-be doctors and vets. Physiology, anatomy, and biochemistry in the first year, yet more anatomy, head and neck, plus biology of disease, the pathology course, the neurobiology course that I and my colleagues have run for many years, the pharmacology course, and various other little bits and pieces besides that everybody has to take with rather little student choice. The third year, though, in comparison, provides unbelievably broad choices. Most students within this honours year select a scientific biological subject from the natural sciences tripos, but some branch out much more broadly. I've students at the moment making their sort of preliminary choices who are thinking of taking political science in the third year, who are thinking of taking biomedical engineering within the engineering tripos. There have been people in the past taking history of art, history and philosophy of science, all sorts of different things. So they're the exceptions that prove the rule. There's the chance to specialize in something that you really, really burn for. And in parallel with all these things through the first 3 years, there's a relatively muted clinical strand that makes sure that they do not lose sight of the fact that they're ultimately going to become medical doctors or practicing vets. What happens very briefly in the ensuing 3 years? Well, in the clinical course, both the medics and vets, it's a twice-told tale. They start off learning the basics in the first year, explore more specialist areas of practice in the second, and then in the final year, year 6 of the overall course, they're much closer to the clinical coalface. And these are accompanied by a series of clinical examinations that they've got to surmount to ultimately become practicing doctors, or in a very similar way, practicing vets. The fourth year, they're applying their scientific knowledge to clinical scenarios. They're developing specialist skills in year 5. And then in year 6, they're branching out and rotating through all the different things carried out within the veterinary hospital here in Cambridge. So they really see all the possible different disciplines involved in vet practice. Now, let me briefly dwell on the application process. Applying may seem to your applicants extremely daunting, but it's actually much more straightforward than most applicants would think. The application procedures start off, of course, with the UCAS application, which tells us all about the applicant, their background, their examination results, both up to that point and predicted if they're applying, as most many would, pre-A level, a personal statement, which gives a bit more background about the individual and rounds out, especially for medicine and vet medicine, the trajectory that has taken them to that rather vocational subject. And then, very importantly, your report as teachers on the candidate, which we do take very seriously, and also taken equally seriously any special circumstances which may relate to the candidate's application, because our aim is to select those with the greatest potential to benefit from our course and thrive within it. Then admissions tests, checking the candidate's skills. We are changing now, because of the demise of the BMAT test, to using the UCAT for the medical applicants and the newly introduced ESAT for the vet applicants. This is unfamiliar territory, both for you and for us, because the UCAT is not something Cambridge has used hitherto, and the ESAT is a new test, but we based pretty closely, I understand, on the pre-existing, the former natural sciences admission assessment, which we used for vets in previous years. And then the interview. This is possibly the most daunting thing of all for candidates, but it shouldn't be. It's not trying to trap out candidates, trip up candidates or trap them. Instead, it's meant to investigate both their motivation towards the subject in the clinical interview aptitude for medicine or vet clinical reasoning, and then within the scientific reasoning interview to see if they can think outside the box, using things that in many cases they'll have met within their school courses, but putting them together in configurations to solve problems that they've never met before. And preparing for this is really a matter of making sure that you can actually think and reason on your feet and that you're prepared to have a go at unfamiliar problems. What we do in the scientific reasoning interview at St. John's is to present the candidates within the span of the interview a couple of structured questions. And if I may, if time permits, Elsie, I'd like to lead you all through the question which I used within our medical interviews in this last admissions round in the scientific reasoning interview. It's one of two structured questions within the interview. We use two unstructured questions, each prepared by a separate interviewer, to make sure that the candidates, if they stumble on one, have a chance to start afresh on something entirely different so that we get a fair assessment of their actual potential and abilities. And the aim is to test reasoning skills and potential, not just knowledge. It's not a matter of what you know, it's a matter of what the candidate can do with what they already know. And if the candidate lacks specific information, then it's provided and we see what they can do with it. And a very positive feature of a successful interview is when a candidate doesn't know something, they're given that new piece of information and they then incorporate it into their solution to the problem in an effective and compelling way. That's a very good sign of high potential. So if your candidates feel intimidated by the thought, I may not know it, they don't have to know it. It's how they think and reason. And the example I show you is designed specifically for use in an online Zoom interview. We use online interviewing for several reasons. This was obviously triggered by the problems of the pandemic, but we found that it is a very effective way of assessing potential, and it removes the potential panic that some candidates may encounter when being interviewed in an environment that's very unfamiliar to them. Coming to Cambridge with the prime purpose of being interviewed is potentially very intimidating to a candidate. We recognize that, and we found that a Zoom interview in most cases is less intimidating to the candidate, but still provides us with the information that we need. And typically, as you'll see in the example I present, there'll be some physical and chemical and mathematical concepts contained within the interview question. With chemistry, as A-level chemistry is a medical matriculation requirement, we can use A-level level skills. But for the physical and mathematical concepts, typically we would be making sure that they can handle quantitative ideas at GCSE level fluently and confidently, but not trying to stretch them beyond their comfort zone, because some will be from a more biological background, some from a more physical background, but chemistry there is the great leveler. And you may be thinking, I'm revealing a question, this might be used again. We now never reuse questions year to year. So disclosing it tells your future candidates, other than being an example of the sort of thing that might be used, nothing in detail about what actually will be used in a forthcoming year. So, and I do provide another full example as an animated click-through sequence on the St. John's College website. And this has very much been designed for use by prospective candidates, where each individual slide in this click-through sequence ends with an italicized leading question that leads you on to the next step. So Elsie, shall I now proceed with my example question from this last admissions round?
Please do.
Which very typically starts off with a thought-provoking image. And the question would be, have you ever seen anything like this before? Or what do you think these cells might be? Not with the expectation that they have to know what they are, but whether they might reason. And the overwhelming majority of candidates, when presented with this image, was saying, long dangly bits. Maybe they are ciliated cells of some sort. And the answer to that is very good answer. They started off in evolution as ciliated cells. They actually are the rod and cone photoreceptors of the retina. But what started in evolutionary time as a cilium has become the specialized part of the cell, the outer segment, within which the process of phototransduction, turning light into an electrical signal, is carried out. But the cilium has dilated remarkably and contains in the rod this remarkable stack of discs, rather like a stack of pennies, discs of membrane within the outer segment itself, within what used to be a cilium. So the next question of the candidate is, why might this be important? Why do we want all these membranes stacked up along the length of the outer segment of the photoreceptor? And most candidates, maybe after a little bit of prompting, work out that the purpose of the photoreceptor is to catch a photon of light. And that if the molecule, the photopigment that catches light, were an integral membrane protein, by stacking up a lot of membranes along the outer segment of the cell, you maximize the chance that as it progresses along the cell, follow my mouse, a photon would get caught by one or other of these rhodopsin molecules, initiating the transduction process. So, having given the candidate a rather pictorial problem to address, I then progress to make it more quantitative by jumping to the end of the transduction cascade without filling in the molecular details in between, and telling the candidate that in darkness there is a steady electrical current flowing in across the membrane of the outer segment, and the circuit completes via the rest of the cell, the so-called inner segment, but that we're going to focus on this dark current. And that in the next slide, I've plotted out the size of this current in picoamps, 10 to the minus 12 amps, as a function of time during the experiment. And when measuring this current from a single rod photoreceptor, I've presented a series of flashes in darkness, where each flash is 4 times as bright as its immediate predecessor. And I then ask them, so how does the current change as you make the flash brighter and brighter? And the first thing I want them to note is that the current is actually being shut off by the flash of light, and that the suppression of current gets bigger and bigger until for the brightest flashes, we're shutting it off altogether and there's none left. So the response to light consists of a graded suppression of the circulating current. And the better students or the better applicants with a little bit of coaxing would reason out that this suppression of current starts off relatively linear. In other words, we make the flash 4 times brighter, we might suppress about 4 times as much current as we did with the dimmest flash, but that you then saturate progressively in a compressive way. So the relative change becomes progressively smaller and smaller and smaller per unit light. Having pulled apart this first top panel of the picture, I then reveal what happens if you shine steady light on the cell. For some reason, there we are, that's better, it's responding now. My mouse was not responding to clicks. And a steady light, dim light, is turned on at time 0. What happens then? And they immediately tell me it shuts off perhaps a third of the total current. And I then say, but what about the flash responses? I've delivered exactly the same flashes superimposed on this steady light as I presented in darkness. How have the responses changed? And after a little thought, most candidates tell me they've got smaller. And I would ask them, what does this mean for the sensitivity of the cell? And they would tell me, I hope that it's become less sensitive. At which point we explore how much less sensitive steady light makes the cell by making the light some 16 times brighter. And when I've done that, in the bottom panel just revealed, the question becomes, How much further has this reduced the sensitivity of the cell? And how could you work it out by eye from these traces? And some candidates need a bit of coaxing towards this, others leap right to the chase. They notice that the first discernible response on the dimmer steady light, this one here, gives a response about the same amplitude as the response to a 16 times brighter flash on the 16 times brighter steady light in the bottom panel. And therefore that the photoreceptor has, when the background is made 16 times brighter, becomes 16 times less sensitive in direct proportion. I then plot out on a log-log plot, I lead them through the fact these are logarithmic axes, the log of the just detectable flash as a function of the log of the steady intensity. And I ask them, so this is a hockey stick-like graph that separates into two separate halves. Which set of data do you think best describe the effect we've just seen? The data to the right of my red line or the data to the left of my red line? And the successful candidate spots that to the right of the red line, the just detectable flash grows in linear proportion to the steady light, and therefore the data they've just seen fall to the right of that line. And that the just detectable increment is therefore proportional to the steady intensity. Well, I can then ask, so what about the data to the left of the line? What's happening there? And after a little thought, I hope they'll tell me that the sensitivity, the just detectable flash, falls to a constant level and then decreases no further. Now, for many candidates, the time would be consumed there and they'd reach the end of the interview. But imagine that I've got a really strong candidate who's really unstoppable and has just raced through all this material with wonderful insights at every step, even though they've never seen anything like this before. I might then ask, I didn't include that slide here because this is the end of the normal interview. How might you actually describe as an equation the transition from this behavior to this behavior? And the answer is the concept of the dark light, an internal light-like signal that the photoreceptor sees even in complete darkness, that you can add onto the real steady light you're presenting, but that then limits the receptor's sensitivity when the real steady light becomes very dim. But for most candidates, this would be the last slide. They would have reached a successful goal. And if they'd dealt with everything I presented well, they would be within the range of candidates we would seriously consider making an offer to, if they performed well in all the other stages of the process. Because we do, I stress, take a holistic view of every candidate. We are looking at everything. It's probably the most extensive, most detailed examination of the candidate's potential and achievements that will ever have happened up to that point. No piece of information goes disregarded. But, and this is a slide for the candidates to whom I'm presenting this sort of presentation, not specifically to you, there are lots of extracurricular things going on within Cambridge, not just the work and not just the things that they're doing to further their understanding of the subject. What I always say to my newly arrived undergraduate cohort is that there's time within Cambridge to do two things really well. One of these must be the academic subject itself, but the other could be anything under the sun. It could be sporting, it could be drama, it could be dance, it could be music. All of these things within the college and university have vibrant communities around them. And if a society doesn't already exist to carry out a particular activity, it's not uncommon to found a new one to do just that. So work hard for sure, but unless you play hard as well, unless there's something else you can do to let off steam and relax, it's not good for the mental equilibrium of the student. Slice yourself too thin with too many other activities, and that can go wrong as well. As the school teachers, you'll know full well. But to have something that you do for recreation along with the main work is pretty much key to being a stable and happy human being. So that concludes what I have to say to you in the formal presentation. I'm now very happy to take questions on any aspect of what I've said or any aspect of the Cambridge course or the admissions process that you may want to dwell upon.
Thank you so much, Hugh. That was a lovely message to end on as well, and a really informative presentation. Thank you so much. I will keep the Q&A box open now. I wanted to first ask a question, if I may, Hugh, myself. When we're advising candidates generally to take part in supercurricular activities, could you give us some examples of the sorts of things that medicine candidates can do in that sense?
Oh, good heavens. Sorry, you're meaning subject-related supercurricular or
Yes,
sporting-related?
so going beyond their
Supercurricular
curriculum.
in the academic-related
Yes,
sense.
yes.
Many, many and varied. It's one of the things that as a well-founded, relatively high resource college, availability college, St. John's can do is be supportive with summer research placements. As well as formal exchange schemes that the college runs with other universities elsewhere. One of my colleagues, a senior colleague who runs most of cancer research within Cambridge, his college role is largely to support and organise such research placements. A good number of our students do go away and work in a lab or visit a hospital to participate in clinical research work, both within the UK and often quite frequently overseas. So, very, very broad variety of things. In later years, within the clinical course, the medical elective is a period when at that point, embryonic doctor can go away and spend a couple of months doing almost anything, almost anywhere. We're fortunate in John's in being able to provide financial support to candidates during their elective period. It's one of the other pluses of being a rich, well-founded college. But at that point, we've had people going all over the world doing all sorts of different things. I'm not sure I've got prepared examples. We've had people going to, very far-flung places doing some quite wild and wonderful things. Is that helpful, Elsie?
Thank you, Hugh. Very helpful. Just to answer Alison's question in the Q&A box about students with additional needs that might come into play when we're thinking about interview adjustments. I know that in the application process, particularly for Cambridge as well, we have a separate application questionnaire. So we get, as Hugh was saying, a lot of different elements that we holistically assess and take into consideration. Part of that process is understanding for the candidates that we select to interview anything that they might need in order to make that a viable process for them, that they can perform at their best. So whilst I don't have a full answer for you, and I'm sorry that I think it's the lack of experience for myself here, and I'm the only representative from the admissions team. If you could email us at admissions@joh.cam.ac.uk, which I've just put in the webinar chat, then I'll be able to look that up for you and ask my colleagues about that.
Okay, I cannot comment through direct experience of profoundly deaf candidates or totally blind candidates. I think within the medical sciences, those would offer significant challenges within the course itself. But I can comment quite extensively on visually impaired candidates. We've had people with quite, both commenting wearing my university hat and my college hat, people with quite profound visual impairment who have been supported according to their specific needs and who have truly thrived within the course. One of our current stars within the clinical course had serious visual impairments developing while here as an undergraduate, received the support they needed, and academically and now clinically are performing at the highest possible levels. I can think of people wearing my departmental hat who likewise from other colleges have been supported by their colleges and by the departments within the university, again, to make sure that they can achieve at their best.
Thank you, Hugh. That's really lovely to hear. And I think that touches on a more broad point about the collegiate university and the structure and how you get that support as a student. academic, pastoral, financial, all different elements from many different networks as a student at Cambridge. Thank you very much. Craig's question next particularly focuses on veterinary medicine applications. What is important in someone's application for veterinary medicine? And is there another similar question perhaps that you could give an example for veterinary medicine? And then he's also asked a subsequent question about work experience for both medics and vets.
Okay, but let me deal with the work experience issue first. It is certainly very helpful when judging motivation of a candidate and the extent to which they've thought through what a career within either medicine or vet medicine would involve, for there to have been some form of contact with, if you like, a caring situation. But we fully recognise that this is easier for candidates from some backgrounds than others. So the form of the work experience could take many, many different types. It could be, voluntary work with a particular group within the community. It could be, one of many, many different things, rather than, strictly speaking, performing a role or shadowing somebody in a medical environment. Because for candidates from some backgrounds, that's much, much easier to achieve than from others. I do know, moving on to the vet side of it, that my colleague David Williams, who is the vet medicine subject director, takes that difficulty of obtaining vet experience very, very seriously. He does mentor potential applicants and give them a day or two within his own clinical work to a remarkably wide degree, but he's obviously a limited resource and the entire world cannot descend upon David's practice room. But I would also draw your attention to various specific Cambridge schemes, the CamVet scheme and various others. At university level, my colleague David Bainbridge runs, especially for candidates from disadvantaged backgrounds, exposure to vet medicine courses during the summer period. I'm not directly involved in those, but I'm very aware they're happening. My outreach involvement is in other areas. As to what we're looking for specifically in a vet as opposed to a medic, I think one of the differences in the interview sequence between the two groups is not so much on the scientific side, where we're essentially looking for the same reasoning skills in both cases, but the way in which the clinical skills or aptitude for vet medicine interview is run. The medical interview, fools rush in where angels fear to tread, as the saying goes. My clinical colleagues who are deeply involved in those interviews are typically investigating both the motivation towards medicine as a vocational career and the extent to which the candidate has thought about some of the issues, both ethical and other, that would raise. The vet interview, a very typical pattern is to use clinical scenarios, some of which can involve, with patient contact and companion animals, some quite significant ethical elements as well, but thinking through particular situations that might illuminate the candidate's motivation for and enthusiasm for actual vet practice. Is that helpful, Elsie?
Extremely. That was a very thorough answer. Thank you so much. We've had another question come in, this time about open applications. So this is relating to at point of application when they submit their UCAS application to us. Students can put a college preference. Hugh, would you be able to talk us through a little bit about how, if at all, that factors into the admissions process?
Well, to some degree, I think, to be fair, those applications, that substantial electronic file of applications that would come directly to me and my immediate colleagues, will be those that have been directed specifically at our own college, St. John's. The open applications, in that sense, Um, I'm not saying that they'll be considered in any less detail than others, but they will not immediately go unless allocated by the central process that sends things out to colleges to somebody who will immediately scrutinize them in the same way as those that have primarily come to that initial college. So Elsie, as part of the admissions team, may actually be better placed to comment on that than I am, because I tend to be seeing at the point that I make these assessments, those who've actually placed St. John's as the first choice college.
Yes,
So I'm not
absolutely.
implying they won't be
No.
considered, but they will not until some more central process has directed them towards a particular college, be looked at in the level of detail than one would look at someone already in that electronic pile of UCAS
Mm,
forms, Cambridge specific forms, that a candidate already in that pile would be.
mm,
Once they'd entered the orbit of a particular college, they would be scrutinized in exactly the same way as
mm,
everybody else with that college. We
mm.
would not, or certainly I would not, hold the fact that they'd not primarily chosen us either as an advantage for them
No,
or as a disadvantage. It's
no.
just no information. It doesn't
Yeah.
matter.
No, exactly.
In just the same way
Yeah.
that when a particular college perhaps receives more strong applicants than they themselves can take, the pooling process, either following the primary admissions round or the adjustment pool that takes place in the summer, there are other colleges that may by chance have received a less strong applicant cohort in the first round who will avidly look at the pool and, if a candidate's strong, they'll take them. I've had strong people taken from St. John's who, given another year and given another field, we might have taken, who've then been grabbed with open arms by other colleges to whom they didn't originally apply and have done extremely well there.
Thank you, Hugh. Yes, absolutely. I didn't have anything more to add. The only thing I was going to mention was about the pool as well. So what I will say is that in the follow-up email that I send, I will link the college choice webpage from the Central University. I think it's very, very useful for candidates and those supporting them making applications, because it has not only factors to consider when making a college choice, but also factors not to consider. And some of those can be quite surprising. And they do counter some assumptions that a lot of candidates make. For instance, I know that a lot of candidates think, oh, well, if I, let's say, have a particular academic interest within my subject, I'm going to try and apply to the college where I can see from the webpage there is an academic somehow affiliated who also researches in that discipline that I, as the candidate, let's say, am interested in. But that's one of the factors that they shouldn't consider as their college choice deciding factor, because, well, for many reasons, we're interested in what the candidate is interested in. It's not an opportunity, the interview or the personal statement or any element of the application, for them to try and match up their sort of subject interest in that sense. And also, our academics are affiliated in many different ways, and may in fact, for the period of time that they are a student there, may be on sabbatical, they may be on leave, they may be at another institution. So it shouldn't be. That is just one example of one of the factors not to bring into a college choice consideration. But I will share that webpage because it goes into a little more
Indeed,
detail.
do I amplify on that last point,
Mm,
Elsie? At part two level, the
mm.
third year honours year within the course, um, people may end up, students may end up doing research projects within their part two year, of course, with academics from totally different colleges. I have at the moment 5 project students within part two physiology, development, and neuroscience on the go, none of whom are from St. John's, and all of whom are absolutely excellent. And they're interested in the varied things I'm interested in, and therefore they're doing projects with me.
Yes,
It's not because
absolutely.
they're at my college. It's just
No.
because they're within the department of which I am a part, and within which I've offered third-year projects,
Mm,
and they're interested in those topics.
absolutely. Thank you, Hugh. We have another question about the UCAT in particular. I wanted to highlight this because we did briefly mention admissions tests. Is there, the question says, a possible cutoff that students should be aiming for in terms of a score, as a sort of a score above which or below which decisions would be made? Hugh, would you
Well,
be able
I
to?
fear, Elsie, this is
Mm,
something you're going to have to put in your supplementary information because
Sure.
as the director of studies in an individual college, I do not yet have experience with how UCAT maps onto the other tests we have used so far,
Mm,
nor from a single college basis, even if we had, would I have a large enough statistical database
mm,
to actually make a clear judgment as
mm,
to where that cutoff should be.
mm,
However, what I can say for the admissions tests we've used previously, both BMAT for the medical students and the NSAA for the vet applicants, the Central University Admissions Office do have that statistical universe of data from which they can produce reliable cutoffs for deselection, if you like, of those candidates who are not likely to be within the top tranche at interview, based on knowing from that bigger distribution, both from candidates from, favored backgrounds and candidates who may come from less advantaged backgrounds, where the quartiles in the distribution lie. But from a single college's applicant field, even if we'd been using it UCAT as part of our admissions process for many years, without reference to this broader database, one couldn't from a single college's field give those hard answers.
mm. No,
So
absolutely.
in a sense, Elsie, I'm
Mm.
not dodging the question,
No, no, no.
saying that at this point, I as an individual don't yet have the data
Yeah.
needed, but the central bodies are
Mm.
busily accumulating correlations between UCAT performance and past BMAT performance and NSA performance, so that at the point it matters, the
Yes.
colleges can be provided with clear guidance that is evidence-driven, not
Yes.
just, in some sense, a random pin in a list.
Yes, absolutely. The one thing I would add is that for all of these admissions tests, when we're looking at candidates' scores or performance, we are not just looking at that number in a vacuum, whatever it may be. We are looking within the context of them as an applicant. So we look together at all of the applicants from China, all of the applicants from Europe, North America, and then also within the UK context, we look at sort of gender split and also maintained schools as well. So we are looking within their actual lived context and seeing how they rank within that specific cohort. So I think that's a really important point to bring out as well, if I may, because but yeah, it goes back to what we were saying before about that holistic contextual assessment of all
Totally
of these
agree. And we're
points.
very firmly contextualizing this
Yes.
scores. We're not just measuring attainment at this point. We're looking for the potential for future development and growth as well. And you could have a candidate who had rather little potential, rather little opportunity to achieve that full potential hitherto, but nonetheless, all the markers were in place indicating that the potential was present. And the contextual assessment of everything we see and the holistic approach is vital to be able to achieve that. Plus the design of interview questions in such a way that they will not be familiar to one applicant group but unfamiliar to another. Ideally, they should be testing the reasoning skills rather than the prior exposure and knowledge skills of all candidates.
Absolutely.
It's not about what you know, it's about what you can do with what you know.
Yes, definitely. Justin's question is an excellent one, and I'm interested to hand it straight over to you, Hugh, if I may. Essentially, the preclinical and clinical split of those 3 years and then subsequent 3 years that it defines the Cambridge Medical Sciences course. How would you reflect on the benefits of that way of structuring a medicine course?
I think one of the strong benefits, I can speak to this rather clearly, is that Cambridge is potentially producing the clinician scientists of the future and the leaders of the future. Not the people, I mean, ideally, we should produce people who are both excellent practitioners in whatever area of medicine they move into, but within that area, they should be the ones in future who have the understanding of why they're doing what they're doing and how what they're doing works, to be able to fundamentally change the area they're working in. And you might think, oh, he's getting on some pedestal about very specialized areas of hospital medicine. Far from it. Going back a few clinical directors of studies ago, then now emeritus director of studies for the clinical cohort was within Cambridge Professor of General Practice. Somebody who moved and changed what one would regard as being the, nuts and bolts, coalface medicine, not some very high-flown speciality. So that's one side of it. The other side of it, I think, comes from the point at which a preclinical student progresses into the clinical course. And there we have got a means by which we can compare the Cambridge undergraduate product with those from other medical schools at that level. Because now that all Cambridge clinical students remain in Cambridge for their clinical years 4 through 6, rather than merely using the resources of Addenbrooke's, which, even though a large hospital is a finite resource, they are scattered out for specialist rotations at hospitals all over the southeast of England. And there, of course, on rotation are students from other medical schools with more vertically integrated courses. And the comment that universally comes back about the cross-comparison between the Cambridge students and those from other more vertically integrated courses is, while in the very early stages, the Cambridge students are less familiar initially with hands-on clinical skills. They acquire those extremely rapidly, but once they have, they are the ones who are in the position to actually think the problem, because they understand the underlying biological mechanisms that in either normal health or disease contribute to the problem. Whereas from a lot of more vertically integrated courses, even though the best students will achieve a similar level of conceptual understanding, there'll be quite a lot of, you do this next because that's what you're told to do next. So it's a rather Cambridge-centric response from someone who is a scientist rather than a practicing clinician. But nonetheless, I believe that that is what makes the Cambridge course rather unique.
Thank you, Hugh. That's really useful. I'd never had that question posed to me or heard an answer for it, so that's very, very helpful for me as well. Just a quick couple questions that I think I might be able to answer. Please do come in, Hugh, if you need to correct me. For the intercalation for that 3rd year, students always do that within Cambridge. They always pick within the available undergraduate courses for that part of their tripos, don't they? Yes.
Well, yes, they do, but it can be very broadly from within other triposes other than merely the most obvious biomedical subjects. But yes, within Cambridge. The only exceptions to that rule, though I cannot think of an example of this being done by a medical student at that stage, some of our international exchanges, which are for a full year, might potentially allow for that to happen elsewhere, but I can't think of a specific example of it having happened.
Thank you. Alison's followed up with a question about college choice that we were touching on earlier. And I think what we were saying basically was that college choice is a personal one, but it's not one that factors in to an applicant's chances of getting in, and there's no advantage or disadvantage either way there. So I think that hopefully will answer your question, Alison, about college choice. If they haven't had an opportunity to visit a college, they can also look at the virtual tours. So at St John's, we have a virtual tour, a 360-degree virtual tour linked on our website, and other colleges have that as well. And I know that the Central Admissions Office in Cambridge are currently in the process of updating those virtual tours as well to make them a very accessible tool for other students who are visiting in person, almost like an audio guide in a museum. And we at St John's and all other colleges do as well run webinars. Our next one coming up for students is a student Q&A panel. So current undergraduates in a range of different courses will be talking about their experiences applying and studying. So that also helps, I think, with college choice, particularly if students aren't familiar with any or all of the colleges.
Could I also elaborate on that point regarding college choice not either advantaging or disadvantaging an applicant? There's a very careful moderation process in the admissions round that takes place between colleges before offers can be made, which makes sure that colleges are offering to candidates at a similar level, and also facilitating the movement of strong candidates that one college cannot take into the pool so that others can consider them. So we are very, very careful to make sure that between the individual colleges, we're looking for the same level of potential and ideally assessing for the same things.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Very, very carefully moderated.
Yes. We have a question about experience of practicing interviews, or being tutored, potential applicants being tutored in how to answer these interview style questions, and whether that has an advantage or not. If I might say that instinctively, I would think that if someone comes across as very rehearsed and they're answering the question that they wish had been asked, instead of the actual live question or responding to the prompt, whatever that may be, in the interview itself, that's not what we're looking for. We're looking for someone who, as you've demonstrated to you, can think with that intellectual flexibility about the question posed. What would you say?
I totally agree. And I think that coaching will not help. Practicing, possibly, possibly with another applicant, possibly with a teacher, just practicing dealing with unfamiliar scenarios and unfamiliar questions so that you're used to thinking on your feet. And that does not require great resources. It can be one applicant just talking to another, explain this, what happens next. But it's being ready to actually externalize what you're thinking. The worst thing that a candidate can do at interview is just clam up and say nothing. Oh, I don't know this, so I can't answer it. We don't want to know what you know. We want you to externalize your thought process so we can judge whether that thought process is moving you in a direction that's going to go somewhere good. So I think the main thing that a candidate has got to be confident in doing at the point they present to interview is externalizing the thought process and being prepared to engage with the questions. But over-rehearsed, and imagining you know the answer before you've been asked the question, that is the sort of thing that can destroy a candidate who's been very, very carefully prepped in a way that actually ends up disadvantaging rather than advantaging them.
Yes,
Is that a fair
counterproductive.
answer, Elsie?
Yes, absolutely. I was going to say it's counterproductive, if anything. That's what I would
I
say.
think
Yeah.
overcoaching, it wouldn't help, but it could
No.
actually hinder and damage it.
Certainly. I've
And
left Johnny's.
preparation,
Sorry. No.
preparation doesn't require special skills or special input. It's one of the reasons why several years ago I put a sample step-by-step question up on our website for St. John's so that candidates could work through, if you like, a superset of everything that the very best hypothetical impossible candidate might be asked or might encounter in the interview.
Yeah.
So they can just say, oh, well, it's demanding, but I can do it. I can
Yes.
my feet, just like that, hypothetical perfect candidate.
Yes, that guided example question I will link in the follow-up email. It's a really, really useful resource that we have on our college website. I've left Johnny's question to last as we near the end of today's session. Perhaps you could leave us with a top tip that our attendees could pass on to their prospective applicants. A top tip for preparing, going through that application journey for veterinary medicine, for medical sciences. What would be sort of your final message?
Oh, heavens. Let me split this into two halves. The first, be excited about the journey you're embarking upon. It's not, medicine and vet medicine are fascinating areas because they combine the vocational with the scientific. And in Cambridge, the scientific is very much in sharp focus. So thinking through why you want this particular combination and why, being in an environment within which you can really excel in both of them is important to you. But for the interview, I think I will quote Einstein. Usually there's an Einstein quote somewhere that fits. And this particular quote is from a poster in my school chaplain's office many, many years ago. Imagination is more important than knowledge. In this particular case, applying to the interview, it's that willingness to engage and reason with a problem rather than just either very confidently, over self-confidently, I know it. Alternatively, help, I don't know it, therefore I can't say anything. So be prepared to think on your feet and reason rather than just presenting back a pre-learned message. And that's something that will be built upon and enhanced during the especially the first year within the Cambridge course. At A-level, typically speaking, candidates are thinking relatively short-range arguments. They're presenting something that they've met before. What we expect them to be able to do by the end of the first year within the Cambridge course is build long arcs of argument, joining together lots of ideas. And, the best candidates will really love that transition and really revel in it. So those are my pieces of advice for what little they're worth.
Excellent, excellent pieces of advice. As always, Hugh, thank you so much for your time this evening. I found it a really enjoyable and useful session, and I hope that the attendees would agree with me as well. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming and answering excellent questions. I will, as I say, be following up with you all with an email summarising all of the useful web pages and resources that Hugh and I have mentioned this evening. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Goodbye.
Been a real pleasure.
Thank you.